Is bone broth legit? Is there anything else we want to say about frickin' bone broth? Hi, I'm Allie.
And I'm Becky.
We are registered dietitians that believe in the power of food as medicine, and we use functional approaches to whole body health.
In today's video, we will be covering whether store-bought bone broth is legit and talking about 3 ways to soup up your bone broth. So let's kick off, Ellie. I know there's a lot of bone broth brands cropping up in the stores, and I think this happens when a food becomes popularized, that there's a lot of players in the game trying to get in. So what about those store-bought bone broths? Kind of, can we distinguish, and maybe first, what is bone broth?
Yes, so bone broth can be distinguished from chicken soup or chicken stock. And there's a lot of nuances between the terms. Some will say the word stock requires bones and chicken broth is the one that would use chicken meat. But for all intent and purpose of today's video, bone broth is going to be a slow simmered broth, which uses the carcass of chicken, beef, pork, or fish, any form of animal bone. And in the slow simmer process, there's usually an acid added, like apple cider vinegar, to aid in leaching out the collagen, gelatin, amino acids that are therapeutic, as well as other compounds to add the nutrient density. And we generally say that a quality broth will be slow simmered for a minimum of 12 hours. All of the recipes over at the Naturally Nourished blog and in my cookbooks are going to be a minimum of 18, upwards of 24 hours. And beyond the bones, you'll often see some vegetable scraps used. So carrot tops, or like a mirepoix, which is your standard blend of your onion, celery, and carrots. We use black peppercorns in ours, and you can also add some therapeutic boosts like turmeric and garlic.
So when we look at these products on the shelf, then let's talk about what makes one legit versus another.
Yeah, so the first thing I look for is quality sourced bones. They need to use bones in order to make a bone broth. Again, just a simple chicken stock could require only an hour of a cooking process, and that's usually going to use a whole part of a meat or like a quartered chicken, and they'll pull that out within 1 hour, so you're not getting that jiggly, gelatinous broth, which we want for bone broth. So you want to ensure that there are bones that are in the ingredients and that these are grass-fed or pasture-raised or wild caught if we're talking about a fish stock. And we want to ensure that these are also going to be accompanied with identifiable ingredients like herbs, seasonings, and spices. We want to make sure that a quality broth is free of MSG, maltodextrin, other additives and preservatives like hydrolyzed proteins, and other chemical shitstorms.
So if you don't recognize it on the label, I think that stands the test of time. Don't eat it. And even going to these like powdered bone broths that are coming out now, watch out for anti-caking agents as well.
Yes, definitely.
And then we also want to look at that cooking process, as you mentioned. So that slow simmer, 12 plus hours. And ideally you want the product to be perishable.
Yes.
So either it's stored frozen or refrigerated, or maybe it's HPP packed, which means high pressure pasteurized, and could be stored at shelf stability.
Then the third thing that you want to consider is the packaging itself.
Sure.
So we are proponents of a BPA-free freezer bag plastic, like Bonafide Provisions uses, or glass as the best option, which we see from our friends Fond Bone Broth out of San Antonio, Texas.
All right, so let's whip up a couple of our favorite bone broth recipes.
And now we want to show you 3 ways to get the bone broth in that doesn't just taste like broth itself. So these have a lot of different flavor enhancers, and this is going to also add different vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. All right, so in this mug, I have just over a cup of the warmed beef bone broth. And I'm going to add in a teaspoon of miso. This is a fermented soybean paste, which is going to have probacteria in it, that good, healthy, friendly bacteria for our gut to support the microbiome. It's important that you add the miso after you've removed the broth from the simmering heat so you don't kill off those friendly gut bugs. So I'm gonna add a good hefty teaspoon in here and just slowly stir that in. And maybe I'll have you stir that, Becky. And then I'm going to, sticking in the kind of Asian flavor profile and adding nutrient density that is good for our thyroid, I'm going to tear up a sheet of nori. So this is the seaweed that would be used for your sushi. I'm gonna tear up thin strips here, and this is just going to rehydrate into that warmed broth. And you'll see the miso is just getting nice and creamy in there. And then we're going to top it with some scallions. I've also done this exact recipe where as I'm simmering the broth, I'll throw in chopped up wild cod. Very simply, it could be a frozen wild cod that I've thawed overnight in the refrigerator. And then that really makes a meal in a mug by adding that boost of protein as well as adding omega-3 fatty acids. So now I'm gonna toss in the seaweed. This is gonna provide us some iodine and minerals, as I said, to support the thyroid and boost metabolism. And that'll just rehydrate nicely into the broth. About half of a sheet in there. Kind of fold that in. And we'll top this with scallions.
So really flavorful sipper. This wouldn't be a complete meal, just kind of a snack in between meals. Or like you said, you could add that cod to make it more of a meal.
And even shredded chicken would work really well with
Or
this flavor
eggs.
profile. Ooh, yeah, like an egg drop soup.
Yeah.
Right? I think that'd be great. Awesome. So what's up next, Becky?
All right, so I've been over here chopping some tomatoes for a tomato basil version of our bone broth. So I've chopped and seeded the majority of these tomatoes. I'll just show you guys one real quick. So I'm cutting it in half lengthwise and then using a spoon to actually remove the seeds. And those seeds are where we would find in something like a tomato some of its anti-nutrients like lectins that we've talked about.
Yes, we have an entire podcast episode called In Defense of Vegetables, where we talk about anti-nutrients. And our philosophy in the Naturally Nourished Clinic is that if you are not dealing with a severe case of leaky gut and you aren't dealing with inflammatory bowel condition, that most clients do tolerate these anti-nutrients. And consuming the lectins with the broth is going to coat and protect. Remember, bone broth is like a facelift for the gut as is. So you're likely going to be fine. These were Roma tomatoes from our farmer's market. If they were heirloom tomatoes, I'd probably keep all the juicy insides intact. Would you agree?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
And so we're just kind of getting rid of that because it's a little bit mealy after storage for a week from our farm share. So we're gonna put in 3 cups of the tomatoes that have been de-seeded into the base of the simmering 3 cups of broth in my blender. All right.
And then over here, I've just smashed 2 cloves of garlic. We're gonna pop that right in raw.
So we're gonna add in about a half cup of packed basil leaves that I'm gonna throw into the soup that will blend. Nice. All right. And then cracked black pepper and a liberal pinch of our sea salt. So I'm gonna do about a half teaspoon of cracked black pepper and a good pinch of the Redmond real salt in there. And we're gonna whip this up. As the blender is going, I'm going to be drizzling in a quality extra virgin olive oil. So this is my favorite olive oil from Greece. You always want to check a single origin olive oil is generally going to yield higher quality, higher polyphenols and antioxidants. And we know a lot of the store-bought options have added oils like canola, so something to keep in mind. So I'm going to get things blended and then I'll start to drizzle that in. Nice and creamy. So we will pour that into here. All right, so we have our creamy tomato basil broth here. It's fantastic. We have the miso scallion seaweed bone broth. And then this recipe we whipped up in a prior video. This is our turmeric lime coconut milk. And you can see all of the recipes below, but all the more reason to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can learn this recipe, which we demoed in a prior video, and the top 5 therapeutic nutrients that you will find in bone broth, why we find it an essential tool in your food as medicine cabinet.
And if you like these recipes, head on over and check out the Anti-Anxiety Diet Cookbook, because we have in there Bone Broth 5 Ways that features these recipes and a couple more ways that you can enjoy your bone broth.
As well as our favorite recipe of how to make bone broth from scratch.
Yeah.
This is a fermented soy paste, and this is oh my God. B-roll footage.
Should have checked if it was open.